If you're new here, my name is Ruth Ann. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and for the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. Today I have Kevin and Allison with me for our fifth and final episode on disability and advocacy. Today's episode, we are going to talk about advocacy and becoming legal guardians to their son, and then also teamwork, parenting a child with a disability. So thanks again for joining me, Kevin and Allison.
Thanks for having us.
Kevin, you mentioned in a previous episode that you've written several books and other publications on disability and advocacy. When did you start writing about this? And can you share some of your publications with us?
Yeah, so I've been a professional philosopher for about 20 years. I teach, I write. Most of what I write is for other professional philosophers. And as some people regularly tell me, other folks aren't really interested in reading a lot of that stuff. When I was coming up to my first sabbatical about 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, actually, was right when Jameson was initially having some of the difficulties in public school. We realized that they had been violating law with respect to his education. And for sabbatical, you have a semester off from teaching so that you can start a new scholarly program. And I wasn't sure what else to write about. So I just said I should start thinking about disability a little bit more. I have written now two kind of general audience books about disability. The first is Disability and Inclusive Communities. And it started off as like what I wish the people in our lives knew about some of what we were facing, why some of the social dynamics, the social structures were difficult, the ways in which disabled people had historically been mistreated and still are by our culture, and sort of a call to why we need to do better. I, about a year ago, published a book called Embodiment, Dependence, and God. And so it's looking at the ways that sometimes we sort of forget that to be human is to be an embodied being, and we expect us to be just sort of like disembodied rational agents that do stuff. But we don't. So even though we sort of ignore certain kinds of embodiment, we also stigmatize certain kinds. And so there's a fair bit of disability in there. I look at the way that, say, trans folks are stigmatized or fat people are stigmatized, and the ways in which the stigma and the ways that we treat certain sorts of bodies as different than others often reflects what we value and who we don't value. And making claims that to be human is to be dependent, is to need to receive and give care in different ways at different times, and to try to pull a lot of these things together. I've also written a number of scholarly articles that just come out of my advocacy work. So I've gotten two papers on the way that public education, especially mistreated and disproportionately harmed disabled students during the pandemic. So when Michigan, for instance, went fully virtual with their classes, they were trying to figure out exactly how to do it. And I did a Freedom of Information Act request, and I got administrators talking with a lawyer that said, if what you do online is official instructional time, then you are bound by the non-discrimination parts of IDEA and the ADA. And so you would still have to find a way to get students to receive OT via Zoom or speech therapy. But if you suspend the entire academic year and then just give them voluntary resources of what to do, none of that holds up. And so that was the decision that the district made. They were, quote, freed from compliance by not actually doing it. So I've got a couple of papers on that. Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely horrific when you see that this is how not just Kent Integrated School District, but dozens of districts around the country made their pandemic decisions as a way of avoiding having admittedly really, really complicated legal situations with respect to special education. I've got a paper that's coming out later this year in a law journal arguing against the religious exemption. So there's federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability status, but religious institutions can just say we're religious, it's religious freedom, and any lawsuit about that is just thrown out of court. So I'm looking at that kind of stuff. And so a fair bit of what I've been writing actually comes out of some of our family's own lived experiences in the advocacy work that I've done. And you can find copies of almost all of these things as PDFs on my website.
There was another thing that you did that I actually think is good for people who are of the religious sort, the video that you did about disability in heaven, which is something we can share as well. But I really enjoyed that. And it was something that kind of, I don't know, I think it might speak to people that have kids with disabilities and whatnot. So.
Yeah, so the Notre Dame Center for Philosophy of Religion hired a filmmaking crew to do a short 10-minute video drawing off some of my work on the ways that the Christian tradition has thought about disability, and the way that many Christians think that what is needed in the resurrection is to be healed from or freed from or cured from your disabilities. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it, that there are, it reinforces this idea that to be disabled is to be bad, to be less than. And so we can give you the link for folks. And plus then you can see Jameson and you can see our daughters and you can see a little bit of, from about 7 or 8 years ago, part of the lived day-to-day lives of our family.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yes, definitely. I will post all of those links in the comments, and I look forward to looking at that video. That's something that I would be really interested in.
I'm surprised you haven't seen that. I don't know. That's I'm surprised because
I've kind of lived in like in a cave, I guess, for so many years. I'm just starting to come back out of that. Anyway, are there moments that you've had to advocate in ways that you didn't expect or that challenged you?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like there are things that I just thought were like understood. I guess that, like, I mean, growing up, so I had a father who was disabled. He'd stepped on a landmine in Korea. So I've always lived with disability. So like, I've always known that. And I just remember we would park, in the disabled parking or whatever. And like, I always thought like, it was just kind of understood that you just don't park in those things. So I think that was one of those things that when like we would have trouble and I'm like, I can't believe that people are parking here. Like, really? I mean, there's like 2 rows down, you can park it there. Like, I don't even, and even when I have Jameson, if I see a space that isn't a disabled parking space, like that's still fairly close, that I will park in that one versus, even though I have Jameson with me, versus parking in the disabled parking, because like there's probably somebody who needs it more than I do, right? Like, so I feel like that was one of the weird things. And Kevin had an instance of, so when the parking became an issue, like I just felt like once we saw it, like we saw it all the time, like people just, taking advantage of those parking spaces, which again, I can't fathom. But I'll let you tell the story since it was.
Is this the one at the school?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
no, this is the one at Hall Street Bakery.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we've had a number of these. So when our son was in elementary school, we dropped off the kids at school. The other girls must have been there too, because I don't think we had even Maggie with us. And we had a meeting with Jameson's education team like an hour later. And so we're just like, what do we do for an hour? So we just decided to go to the closest bakery, have a cup of coffee, have a scone or a pastry, and then come back to the meeting. And this was winter in Michigan. We live in West Michigan, get about 6 or 7 feet of average snowfall. And this is a bakery in sort of a historic part of town. And they had one and only one accessible parking spot. And they had plowed the entire parking lot into the accessible spot, and we'd had snow for weeks, so it was like a giant 4-foot, 5-foot tall ice block. And so when we didn't have Jameson with us, we weren't going to use it anyway. But when we went in and just said like, I'd like a flat white or Americano or whatever it was. And by the way, your plowing company has done this thing that's illegal and you probably need to like look into it. And whoever was there that day, just like the morning manager, like, I don't know what's going on. So they encouraged me to say something to the owners on their Facebook page. So I just took a picture of it and then I uploaded it and I just said, right, like, you need to look into this because this violates 30-year-old federal law.
And it was interesting. So somebody who commented was our daughter's first grade teacher, happened to know the owner of this bakery. And so she had commented, oh, so-and-so, I can't remember his name right now. Hey, look into this or whatever, and maybe even put you in contact. I don't know if she sent us an email or something.
Yeah,
I don't know
remember
how that went.
So then about a week later, I get called to the president of my university's office because our daughter's first grade teacher and the president of my university and the chaplain at my university had all gotten this email written by the business owner that I was out to destroy their family business, that I was undoing the years of good community work that they have done by asking a 30-year-old federal law to be followed, literally calling me an instrument of Satan. Fantastic phrase. And basically asking me to get in trouble at work because I had asked them to follow
to
the
not
law.
Plow their snow into the one accessible space that they had.
And so this wasn't received well by me. So I filed a civil rights division complaint with the Department of Justice as required by, right, as the federal institution that goes into ADA compliance. It started about a year-long process where we went to mediation. Mediation agreed with me that they had violated the law. They needed to do this. They needed to update their parking lot. Not only had they been plowing into the spot, but their parking lot, even apart from the snow, wasn't ADA compliant. So I'd asked them to fix that, but it would cost them one parking spot, which would mean that they would get less business, all this kind of stuff. And so like it caused this huge ordeal because somebody didn't want to do what
the bare minimum.
Yeah. The bare minimum. I've now filed similar complaints about probably a dozen different local businesses, and I have never had one respond nearly as badly as that one went.
Yeah. And then I don't even think they fixed it.
Nope.
So like, I think it was one of those things they just decided not to do.
Mediation agreed with me, but the process was they just didn't do what the mediator said. And so we'd actually have to file a civil suit against them to try to get them to actually do it.
Yeah. So we just do not go to that bakery, and we tell everybody we know, don't go there. And so, but it's just one of those silly things. They only had like 6 parking spaces to begin with. It's not like they had a lot. A lot of it was just on-street parking. So,
but they didn't want to give up one of those spots in order to have the access aisle. So they didn't have an access aisle. So if you had your van with lamp, like you could not have parked anywhere in their parking lot because there was, even apart from the snow, there's just no way for a wheelchair accessible van unless you have the one that comes out of the very back, which most of them come out the sides. So
I find that response shocking. I had so many instances when I was caring for Lance because we would run into similar things. Where I went to counseling, they didn't have enough handicap accessible spots, and then they decided that they didn't have enough spots at all. So they painted over the accessible spots and then turned the ramp into another spot. So I couldn't even get him into the building where I went to counseling. So I ended up contacting the city about that, and they sent someone out and took care of it. I don't even know that they reported who it was that did that, but I did tell my counselor I was doing it.
This was a Christian's response. Again, like most of the places, they're like, oh, we didn't know we were in violation. We'll fix this. Or like the next time we have it painted or striped or whatever. And like most people have been fairly accommodating, but this was the response from a Christian like business to like try to get him fired for something. And I was just like, he's not getting fired for complaining about this. Like I just
instrument of Satan.
Yeah. So we use that a lot. Yep. when I'm mad at him, or actually not when.
So
I'm
if you're ever in Grand Rapids, avoid the Hall Street Bakery.
Yeah. Could I just say these are people claiming to be Christians. Let's move on to another topic now. Let's talk a little bit about becoming Jameson's legal guardian.
Yes.
So much of this depends on what the specific disabilities are. There are lots of disabled children that will be just fine being their own guardians once they reach 18. But given Jameson's cognitive impairment, right, there's just decisions that he's probably never going to be well positioned to be able to make on his own. And so even though we and his medical community, right, think that this is the right thing to do, there's still a sense of, are we doing the right thing here? Because the agency of disabled folks has been denied and diminished for so many times in history, the way that disabled folks are infantilized. So even doing this, what we think is best for him, comes with all sorts of the need to be very, very careful for us. But we have been talking with a lawyer about a number of things, including what it would take to file for guardianship once he turns 18. We can't do any of it until he turns 18 because we're his legal guardians until then. But we will have to do both certain kinds of medical expertise from folks so that we're not just saying we get guardianship. The court will have to look into whether or not we're the best folks to do this. And so, we've got about another 10 months to figure out exactly how to do this. There are certainly decisions that he's not going to, he's not going to be able to live independently. He's going to need somebody to help make major medical, financial, living arrangements decisions for him. We think that we're the best prepared folks to do that. And so we want to have that in place so that he can be best served when the time comes.
Well, what would you like other people to know about the process of becoming your son's legal guardian? Is there anything that you want to share with people about that?
Well, considering we're still in the process, I don't even know like all the things that go into it or what we will have problems with or whatever. Something else that we have to think about though is, again, since we don't know his life expectancy, there's a good likelihood that he will outlive us, and what his care will look like once we are gone. So we're setting up a trust and, different stuff like that as well. And I think that it's just a scary and kind of sad thing. So I think there's a lot of emotions that go into it as well. And so that part is really sad and like scary for me, is like just thinking of his care after we're gone. Like there are so many, and again, with disabled children, just there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And I'm trying to think about how to put it nicely. They are more likely to be
taken advantage
yes.
of. The data on sexual assault of intellectually disabled folks is absolutely horrific. The abuse stats by professional caregivers in care facilities is horrific. The number of disabled folks that are actually killed by their caregivers. There's the Disability Day of Mourning every year that documents the number of folks that this is, right? Like all of this is just absolutely horrific to contemplate. And we don't like thinking about when our daughters, are fully grown and that they might outlive us. So I guess I'd rather them outlive us than we outlive them.
Yeah.
But at some point they're going to have their own lives and be independent in a way that Jameson's not ever going to be. And so what will it look like when he's 50 and we're mid 70s or 80s?
80s.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's
so
80s.
Like it's extremely unpleasant to think about.
Yeah.
But we have to.
Yeah. That's something, if I thought about it all the time, would keep me up at night. So I just have to like compartmentalize that a little bit and be like, all right, this is not something I'm going to worry about right now. So we're just trying to do the step-by-step, what will happen. But there's just so many things that go into becoming a guardian that we probably don't even know yet. And then like applying for Medicaid,
SSI,
SSI. I don't even know.
SSDI. So he's got a case manager that helps coordinate some of his therapies. And she has been working with us the last couple of months to try to start getting all the stuff together. But we can't do either the SSI or the guardianship stuff until he's actually 18.
Yeah. And so much of that, again, is kind of we don't know what we don't know. And thankfully, we do have a caseworker who's been really good about helping us through kind of that process.
Well, maybe that's something that we can talk about down the road as you've gained more information and experience from doing this, because I think that that's something that would be helpful to other people going through the process. Well, let's talk a little bit about you as a team, because I've already said this before, but I really appreciate how the two of you do this together as a team. You seem to work so well and navigating all of these challenges. So I want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, thankfully we had been married for quite a long time before we even had children. So part of, like, I guess the growing pains of marriage were kind of out of the way by the time we had children. And then, I mean, it was a strain on our marriage. I don't want to say a strain. It was
hard.
It was a challenge. There was guilt. Like, I remember feeling guilty that I'd done something wrong, to have, Jameson be disabled. I'm like, what did I do? And, what could I have done differently? So there was that. So you have a lot of guilt. And this was something we lived in California at the time. So we had no family around. And like, I think all of our friends were single. So we didn't have a lot of, like, people with families, let alone a disabled child, to like talk to things about. So that was a strain. I think since then, like, we've kind of worked through a lot of the hiccups early on. But we have a lot of routines. So that is one thing that with a disabled child, and especially with Jameson, he likes routine. So we've been doing a lot of things. This is very silly, but we have a menu board. Like, we pick out what we're going to eat the whole week, given we're fairly flexible if something happens. But it's helpful for Jameson because he'll be like, oh, we're having, chicken Caesar salad for dinner. So he likes to see that. He knows, he even talks about it at school. Like, he's very food motivated. So he'll talk about that, but it's helpful for us to have certain things like written down. Kevin usually does the medical thing. So he'll take him to therapies, and he, does a lot of the medical stuff. I do a lot of the day-to-day care things. And so I feel like we kind of fell into a routine, just our family as well, like who's doing what and sort of thing.
And often on our evening dog walks, we're like, okay, what's tomorrow look like? Who's got which practices? How are we going to get this kid there? Who's going to take Jameson to OT? Various kinds of stuff. And so we just have a lot of task division, and we be flexible when it's needed, but we've just sort of got the routine, and the routine typically serves us fairly well. And so we go with it. And some of the routine is just to save us trouble, right? So not only do we have the menu board, we write that up on Saturday or Sunday. And so then we get all the ingredients that we need to make all of those things, all the lunches for the week. And so we try to get like the major grocery shop done on the weekend so that we have everything that we need, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating after a long day of parenting and work to realize that you're supposed to have whatever for dinner and you don't have like the main ingredients, and then have to make a quick trip to the store.
Yeah.
And so these little bitty hacks, just so that we know how to do, and it affects even like our, we make our kids pack their school lunches the night before. Just lots of little things to try and have some of the small stuff taken care of so that we have a bit more space.
We have a chore chart, like what the kids can do, because oftentimes they'll be like, what can I do to help you? And I'm like, well, go pick that chore chart, do that. Or because at times when they come up and I'm like, I have no idea, like, I don't know, like, there's so many things that need done. And so I'll be like, just go pick that chore chart and do it. So it helps to have a few little things like that.
Various kinds of scaffolding that just make decisions easier to make.
Yeah.
Sounds
And
like
it's so we still have things to work on with that, but it gets us through the day mostly.
so you've just kind of chosen the things that you do best. Is that kind of how you did it?
Yeah. I think so. Or like the one time frame when we can do things. So there are certain things that Kevin can't do during the day. So like it's easier for me to do during the day. And even him picking up the kids from school is basically so he will stop working. Like part of it is so he will stop working. So he picks the kids up from school, even though I'm probably closer. I think it's one of those ways for him to be like, okay, I need to stop today.
If I didn't leave at 2:15 to go get the kids, then I might be at the office until 5 or 5:30. And so that would bleed into, helping out in the evening. So if I go get the kids and then bring them home, then I can work some from home and help make dinner. And then what I don't get done then happens after the dog walk or the kids go to bed or something like that. So some of the decisions are what's easiest for us, but also just to give the right sort of overall approach. And some of what we do is with an eye towards the way that our culture in general gets some of the stuff wrong. So like almost all the parents that I advocate with in their kids' IEPs are the mothers. Right? There's the stereotype about dads not knowing their kids as pediatricians and all this kind of, right? And so part of it is I want to make sure that I'm doing some of those sorts of things. So I take all of at different times, she does it too, but I'll take all of our kids to their doctor's appointments. If I'm teaching during one of them, then she does it.
Or now I go with the girls because it's just a little more comfortable for them to be there. So, and I love our pediatrician. Like we chat for hours. Like, yeah, she's great.
Well, how has caregiving for Jameson affected your marriage? Are there ways it's brought you closer, or are there challenges that you've found because of it?
I think it's brought us closer in that we've got a common project. And I don't mean that unless sort of like Jameson's something that we have to fix or get done, but the project in the sense of what we care about and what we're trying to do. And so when we are both trying to figure out how to make his life, our daughter's lives, as good as possible, we were oriented towards that good.
Yeah.
But right, like we're tired. It's hard. We spend so much time dividing and conquering, as we call it, rather than being able to do certain things together. Just all the extra time demands on our lives, right? So one time I made the mistake of calculating how much I drive in addition during the week, just because Jameson doesn't ride the bus or to his therapy appointments. And it's on average something like 6 hours a week. And that 6 hours is something that could be spent doing other things. Now I'm often thinking about work or listening to an audiobook, but just all the extra demands, even if it only seems like that's just a 15-minute drive to there, all of it adds up and builds up with time and exhaustion, and emotional labor and just resources and extra guilt. And so all of that together comes to be some pretty significant additional challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it seems like it's made you work harder together.
I think so.
Yeah. And I think we've become a really good team. And again, I think if we would have had children when we were younger, it might have been different, because I don't know that we knew each other well enough to so I feel like that benefited us to have been married for so long before we had children, that we kind of had already worked through a lot of the kinks, I guess, of marriage.
What are some of the good things that have come out of your experience? Something that may not have happened if you hadn't gone through what you've gone through caring for a child with a disability?
I feel like it's made me a lot more empathetic. And that sounds so trite, or it just sounds like very, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I really do feel like I care a lot more for people and what they're going through. And I give a lot more grace to people because I have no idea what they're going through at different times. So other than when I'm driving, I don't have any empathy there. But I feel like I do, like, there's somebody, like a kid crying somewhere, even like on a plane or something. I could care less, because I'm like, that person is trying their very best. There's nobody who hates a crying baby more than the mother or father who is with that crying baby, right? So I think I have a lot more grace and empathy for things like that, and a lot more accepting of people in general and who they are. Like we've talked about just other minorities in general, like there's trans and LGBTQ, but there's just like even people with disabilities. I feel like I will try, where it's probably not that I didn't try before, I just didn't think about it, right? And there are times that I'm thinking about things now, like, how does this affect somebody who is in a wheelchair? How would this affect, me parking here? Can somebody, get into their car if I'm parked like this? No, I need to not park like a jerk. Like, let's go over and park somewhere else. Or they're just little things that you don't even think that would matter to somebody, that it does matter. So
become a lot more aware, one way to put it.
Yeah.
It's changed the scope of my research. I mean, I still do some philosophy that nobody cares about, except for like 6 people in the world. But so much of what I write about now is much more practical. It shaped my classes. Thinking about how disability accommodations work in the classroom has fundamentally reorganized how I teach, because so much of the educational experience puts all the onus on the student to get documentation, to prove that they've got ADHD, to prove that they need this accommodation, to force the faculty to do it. And all of that, as we've said, takes time, energy, access to resources. Can you get an ADHD diagnosis from a psychiatrist? All this kind of stuff. So I try to build as much of that as I can into my classes, so that students don't have to do extra work in order to secure that kind of stuff. And it's made us think a lot more about the ways that the structures in our lives set up to intentionally or not exclude and make things harder on folks, right? So the more gatekeeping there is, the harder it is for people to access resources. And my own take is I would rather all of my students have time and a half on a test, and maybe some students take a little bit more time than they don't deserve or shouldn't get, than to have the students that should get it, right, that extra time, not be able to get it and to be disadvantaged. So much of the structural disadvantage in our history and our culture comes at the expense of the already disadvantaged. But I want us to think carefully about the ways in which we can change how those structures, those default policies work, to make it just a more humane system. So much of the navigating the medical system is dehumanizing. David Perry, another activist, parent of a disabled child, wrote this absolutely fantastic blog post. I think it was for The Mighty a number of years ago, about sort of the forms you have to fill out at all the doctor's office. Can your kid do this? And the way in which, in order to get access for his son to services his son, he has to dehumanize and devalue his kid. And this has resonated really deeply with me. And that so much of our education, medical, interpersonal systems require all this extra that just devalues and makes it harder.
I remember numerous times we've had to do this with Jameson, have an IQ test. And I cannot tell you as a parent how, we would oftentimes they'd give it to us in an envelope and we would never open it, because I don't need to know. And it's not even a great indicator of what he knows, right? And so it was just one of those things. Every time we got it, I'm just I would just cry, because I hated seeing that number, and it would, say something like, oh, his grade level is this or that or whatever. And I'm but I know that he knows more than the things that they were testing on or how they were testing him. He's not going to read something and then scratching a bubble. Does he know the answer to it? Probably, but he's not going to.
It might come out 3 days later when he's talking to himself while eating dinner and says the answer.
Right. So it's one of those things that the test did nothing other than to make you as a parent feel horrible, or if your child is even able to comprehend what was going on, make them feel horrible. So there was just no value in some of those things.
And then it gives other folks a ranking, a percentile, right? A categorization where whether or not they mean it to, it can often result in them, right? Like devaluing. So I think that even though we like his school now, this is part of what we're struggling with, right? Like we want him to be pushed on math, even though he doesn't like math. We want him to be able to pay for something and to know that he's not getting taken advantage of when he's getting change back. But if they look and see that he's in, right, X percentile on math, well then, there's no need to really push him to do this. And so sometimes the numbers, the categorization functions as an excuse to not have to try hard.
It's like they put him in a certain box, like, oh, he's in this level box, and even with an autism diagnosis, and I think that's why a lot of times people don't get diagnoses, is that they don't want their child put in a box, because once you're put in the autism box, there's certain limitations that they don't expect you to, get any further than this level or that level. So they've put you in the autism box and that's where you stay. So I think, or the ADHD box, like name your diagnoses and they put you in that box and then don't push you beyond what they think that box is able to do. So
we've got some friends whose kid is a wheelchair user. And I think for entire life has been, right? Has no functional use of his legs. And so I'm guessing that at certain times people put him in the can't play sports box. But his parents have got him into a wheelchair basketball league. Right? Not something that he can play at school with peer, right? He's got some folks from school that also play in this league, but they found a way that there are folks that are willing to find a different way to approach something rather than he's a paraplegic and can't play basketball. And it's been one of his favorite things to do, and the family loves it.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of example, even with a physical disability, it'd be easy to sort of, oh, well, they've got this condition, we don't have to worry about this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Because Jameson's cognitively impaired, his school has never tried to give him sex ed. So we pushed back against this past year because we know he is more than 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in his life than a non-disabled person.
And we have talked to him about it, but I feel like if he's getting it at school as well, that there's that ability for him to talk more about it.
And they're right. Him and his fellow classmates are cognitively impaired. This would be an awkward conversation. Let's not even try. It's just another example of the way in which the boxes exclude and marginalize.
Yeah.
Is there a message that you would like to share with other parents who may be just starting on this journey, caring for a child with a disability?
Probably the central one for me is that so much of our culture assumes and reinforces that to be disabled is to be broken, to be less than, to not matter as much. And disability comes with challenges. Sometimes it comes with pain that has to be mitigated, pain for the disabled folks, emotional pain for the caregivers. But your kid is not fundamentally less valuable simply because they're disabled. Lance was not fundamentally less valuable because he was disabled, right? Because he needed certain kinds of care that other people do. So the most important thing is, right, your loved one matters, and they are worth celebrating and valuing as they are. And culture's maybe not going to do that. And so we have to do that. We have to celebrate just who they are and how much they matter as they are, and not only if they fit into what society, what the church, what our structures expect people to be like.
And I think you are your child's biggest advocate, or your, the person in your life's biggest advocate. So you need to, this is where it's hard for me because I'm not very confrontational, but you have to be the loud voice for that person who can't be. And so I'm not one to like tell people that they're parked in a disabled parking space that they shouldn't be. Kevin has no problems. I know. Usually I like it, but you have to advocate for them. So if you think your child is being mistreated or not given the same sorts of things that they, need in school, in life, and, different, you have to be that person for them. You need to be loud, and
because if you don't, it's likely that nobody will.
right.
But all while doing that, while being loud, have to realize that there have been lots of folks that have tried to love their loved ones well and have got it really, really wrong. Part of my research has been into the way that schools like Willowbrook, care facilities for disabled folks, often were just sites of absolute abuse and neglect. All right, medical experimentation on thousands of folks without their consent because they were disabled. And I've talked to a local Grand Rapids adult whose mom put him there because she was told by the doctor as a single parent that that would be the best thing for him. And I think of actually when we lived in Idaho, about 7 miles from our house was the Idaho State School and Colony. It was the equivalent of Willowbrook in Idaho. And I remember going one day walking the grounds with Jameson thinking, it would have been far too easy for you to be here, right? And so parents have made awful decisions doing what they thought was best.
Yeah.
And so while we're doing what we think is best, always having to worry about whether or not we're like those parents, right? That your good intentions can't ensure that you've got it right. And so always trying to learn more, always talking to disabled adults. What are the sorts of things that you living with these conditions have realized that we as parents might not do? And so be loud, but also be really, really humble and always be learning.
Yeah.
I do not think that I could have said that any better. So I just want to say how grateful I am to have the two of you here walking part of this journey with me and sharing so much of your vulnerability and your honesty and sharing about your son, Jameson, and your daughters, Emmeline and Maggie. And I just wish you all the best. And thank you for everything that you've shared with us.
Thank you for having the podcast, and thank you for taking the time to try to get part of our story out there so that other folks can maybe benefit either from learning on their own or at least just not feeling as alone if they're in a similar kind of position.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yes.